sure if now is the time to pose a question in regard to what's been proposed before I give my presentation.
Sure, just state your name and if you represent an organization or if it's just yourself, so
Okay.
for the record.
My name is Rebecca Allen Griffith. I am the private landowner of a farm in Scott County, noted to TWRA as the Allen Farm. I have 167 acres with the individual acreage of my sister, my brother, and myself. The farm totals 320 plus acres. That includes approximately 75 acres of cropland. I really am here to speak to you about the amount of elk damage that's done on our farm on an annual basis, roughly since 2002, and the financial loss of revenue that is occurring. To give you a short background, the farm was purchased by our parents in 1947 after our father was released as a prisoner of war in World War II. His desire was to go to a place where there was no one, and they found it. This has been a viable farm for 68 years. With the release of the elk in 2000 at the Royal Blue area, it took only a few months for the elk to show up on the farm. At first, they were quite a novelty, but as the herds began to increase, so did the damage. In an effort to generate needed revenue on the farm, recently I began to look into crop options other than hay. I learned that 2 local farmers were leasing property for soybeans, which was an amazement to me in Scott County. I contacted one of those partners, and he knew exactly where the farm was. He was familiar with the land, said it was very conducive for crop production, but he was not interested in leasing it because of the elk that were on the farm. Honestly, this set off a firestorm in my heart because we'd already been approached about leasing the land for cattle, but fencing was a huge issue with the elk tearing the fences down. So now we were told that even though that our land was conducive for soybean production, the elk were keeping us from that revenue as well. We currently have on most any given day from October to April approximately 40 head of elk on average daily on our farm. That's the same number that's listed on Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation website as being seen at Hatfield Knob Viewing Tower on their visit a couple of years ago. We've had turkey blinds run through, trees uprooted from rubbings. We've dealt with lawn damage, destruction of gardens, fencing torn down, and where we used to be able to cross the creek with farm equipment, we no longer can do that because it's too eroded from elk crossings. We've had much crop damage. According to Idaho.gov, an elk consumes 3 pounds of food for every 100 pounds of weight of the animal. Therefore, we on a daily basis are feeding the elk 615 pounds of grazing nutrition. Based on what we sell our hay for, that's an annual loss of approximately $5,867 a year, or over the past 10 years, we've lost over $58,000. This does not include the additional loss of revenue that could be generated by leasing the property for livestock or soybeans, nor does it include the repair of creek crossing, the replacement of fencing material, and labor. Also, the past 3 years, over $16,000 has been spent on fertilizer and herbicide alone. In addition to the elk problems, our farm lies between 2 county roads. On most spring and fall evenings, the road's like a small tourism route, similar to a little Cades Cove. We've had individuals drive up on the private drive to the barn lot and just say, "We're out looking for the elk." We've even had individuals to ask if they could enter the field and look for sheds. Given the fact of the isolation of the farm and that our farmhouse is on a dead-end county road, this presents a real security issue. For the past 14 years, we've received from TWRA a single-wire electric fence around a garden for 2 years, a turkey blind. 2 years out of 14, we've received grass seed. We were given a screamer gun to scare the elk off, multiple visits of the local volunteer counting elk, and one trip roughly around 2010 where the staff arrived too late to dart the elk. In the past 10 years, my husband has spent hours talking and meeting with TWRA staff, trying to come to some kind of resolve of these elk problems. We've asked for fertilizer assistance from TWRA, that's been denied. We've asked for permits to allow others to hunt elk, that's been denied. We've asked for permits to allow us to kill the elk, but that's been denied. We were told that we could shoot the elk and let it lay, contact TWRA, but as avid sportsmen ourselves, that seemed unthinkable. We think, or in fact, we have recently learned that we really weren't allowed to shoot the elk without a permit because we're in the elk zone, regardless of the damage, but we never could get a permit, period. We've asked for elk to be removed, met only with promises that they were going to get on it. But in the 16 years since the elk have been released, it never happened until March the 17th, after my contact with TWRA in Nashville. It's stated on the TWRA website that the Cumberland Plateau Elk Restoration Zone was the chosen area to introduce elk because, and I quote, it contains few farm crops, few people, and has habitat that's suitable for supporting an elk herd. Honestly, sir and ladies, I somewhat disagree. Of the 670,000 acres that are in the zone, over 480,000 acres are private landowners, or are, according to the State Mapping Office, 10,688 private tracts of land. According to reports, there are a total of only 606 acres of wildlife openings in the 187,000 acres of TWRA land in the zone, with the average opening being 7 acres. I have not, as of this date, been able to find out how many acres of open fields and crops that there are in the 480,000 acres of private landowners. I would venture to say that the private landowners in the zone have more grazing acreage than that of TWRA. I also believe, based on our observation and evidence and eyeballing the elk, that they're in concentrated numbers in specific areas, and only in specific areas are they in concentrated numbers of the zone counties, and they're there from October till April. Therefore, the landowner in great part is supporting this elk project. Based on the information found on the Information Center for Wildlife Damage Management, a study that was done in 1994, and I quote, "Elk prefer riparian zones and benches as opposed to steep slopes, and damage is usually distributed accordingly. Since a riparian zone is an interface between the land and river or stream, and a creek runs through pretty much of the 75 acres of our cropland, our farm meets every criteria. The revenue from our farm is the main resource that we use to sustain the family farm for ourselves, our family, and for our future generations. With the loss of revenue already explained and based on our hay production, we have and are losing approximately 30% of our revenue due to elk grazing. Our family farm cannot afford to operate in such a way to generate revenue just to sustain it and to support an elk herd in large numbers. Although the long-range goal of TWRA in 2000 was to have an elk herd of 1,400 to 1,600 by 2020, that number probably will not be reached. I don't think it's unreasonable, though, to assume that the current herd of 400 could at least double or more in the next 14 years by 2030. But if there's no funding or preparation made to address the damage of elk, of 40 elk on a private farm that's in the zone, and even if they are creating great damage to your land and livelihood, and they cannot be shot by the landowner without a permit, and the landowner can't get a permit, I just say, what are we to do? What are we going to do when there's 80 elk on our farm? Because right now we have 10% of the herd on our farm, basically 180 days out of the year. What's realistically expected of the small farmer, or any farmer for that matter, to do in this situation? This is what I've recently learned as a private landowner living in the Cumberland Plateau Elk Restoration Zone. There's no funding available to assist elk damage. None. It's illegal without a permit to kill an elk doing damage to your property if you're in the zone, regardless of the amount or the extent of the damage. And as explained, we requested permits in every imaginable way for 10 years, but we were denied. However, if you look at the map of the zone, and you are fortunate enough to live just beyond the zone, and I hope I'm understanding this law correctly, If you're having damage on your property and TWRA does not remove the elk, you by legal rights, as I understand, can shoot the elk, let it lay, and notify TWRA of the kill. I've heard of that happening. But more than likely, if you live outside the zone, you may be incurring damage, but probably not to the level that our farm is incurring living inside the zone. So basically, as a private landowner inside the Cumberland Plateau Elk Restoration Zone, as a landowner, we have to pay for all expenses and damage done to our property by the elk. As a landowner, we absorb all the loss of revenue, and we endure the growth of the elk project. I hope the public and this commission would agree that something needs to change. Because this board makes decisions regarding wildlife, and those decisions have effects on landowners, I'm here for several reasons, and I'm almost through. I'm here to equip you with information that I don't believe that this commission has been made aware of about what is happening and what has been happening to landowners. And instead of hearing it third hand, you've heard it from the landowner. From this day forward, now that you are equipped with some knowledge of the extent of the elk damage to private landowners, I hope you would agree that there needs to be some changes made of how TWRA can assist landowners in damages done by this very large and destructive animal that this agency has brought into Tennessee. And I want to tell you that I love wildlife, but there needs to be some changes made regarding the elk. No farmer, large or small, can survive 30% loss annually and constant repair of cost due to elk damage. Last month, and as well as this month today, there has been a proposal made to this commission to allow elk hunting on private land in this fall. And I'm glad that you're wanting to kill them off of private land, but in an effort to generate revenue to the landowner due to the elk damage, as I understand how this proposal is set up, I do not believe that it will generate revenue for those landowners who are incurring the most damage. Therefore, I am asking this commission, rather than passing this proposal now, that it be tabled until more thought can be applied as to how this can really benefit private landowners. It's not about appeasing us that the elk are a nuisance. They're more than a nuisance. They're creating great damage on some properties. Not all landowners in the zone are experiencing the same damage, nor loss of revenue. As an example, there's not a single landowner that joins any of our 320 acres that I know of have expense involved in maintaining their land in an effort to generate revenue. Although elk may be accessing their property, they're not experiencing loss of revenue. And every landowner within the zone don't have 40 elk on their property, basically 180 days out of the year. I've requested financial assistance, and I've given evidence of loss, and I have pictures with me today if you're interested in seeing them, more than what you've seen of the 28 elk that are in the front yard. I have an elk shed so that you know that I've not photoshopped the pictures. There have been people on our property, TWRA staff, to see the damage. We've been told that there's no funding available. So therefore, I'm asking this agency, in addition to my other request, that you assist us in finding any state, federal, corporate, or private funding available to landowners for such continual loss due to elk damage. This problem of elk damage is not going away. As the herd increases, so will the amount of damage to private landowners. Thank you for hearing me out. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Hang on,
Wait a minute.
ma'am.
I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for taking time. I know that Chairman Cannon had shared photographs of your farm, and I think your presentation was exceptionally thoughtful and detailed, and I personally, and I know my colleagues, appreciate your time. It was an effort to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Griffith, before you shared with us your story, you indicated there may be a question for us that you had regarding the amendment. I didn't want that to be lost in this.
Yes, thank you. I did have a question about understanding the proposal that's been made, are you saying that the proposal that has been made is 5 archery tags in addition to the 4 gun tags that would be on private land?
The amendment that we're discussing now would actually create 11 opportunities for sportsmen to hunt on private lands for elk. 6 of which would be with a gun and 5 of which would be archery.
Okay.
And archery, so it would be 2 different segments.
Okay. So, as I understand that to be, there's 6 on TWRA land. There
Any
would
of the
be,
permits can be used for either or. They will draw a public area, the specific zone, except for the juvenile, which they're allowed to go to any zone, and or with their discretion, they can locate and get permission, secure permission, however they see fit to hunt on private lands. And it sounds like you may have a destination for that. So
I do have a destination for all of them that you can bring forth. But my recommendation about this proposal still stands. I still think that there needs to be more thought put into it rather than just opening up to the entire zone, because everybody within the zone is not experiencing what we're experiencing.
I'd like to ask the agency, in the zones that you're proclaiming to be for private lands, I would think that we would need to send an officer out and identify those farms that we would allow within those zones to communicate with the private individuals, because obviously with Mrs. Griffin's situation, it's much more need than somebody that may occasionally have an elk come through and they are, coaxing a hunter to come to pay them to hunt property that basically is not having problems. You don't agree with that?
I do not agree with that. I'm sorry.
What's your thoughts on it?
I feel like we're providing opportunity. I mean, allowing a few people to go to her farm and shoot an elk is not going to do anything to her situation.
It's going to provide financial assistance.
I think that we're very aware of her issue, and I think that there's other measures the agency, I think, is, considering that the elk needs probably relocation is probably something I think would have a bigger impact. Taking some male elk out of the herd is going to have absolutely no impact on the population, and we're not really sure who's going to hunt private and who's not. It's, I think, a step that we can try for now, but I think there's other measures we can discuss.
I guess my thoughts are, though, that we want to make sure we identify those farms that have a problem, because what the whole issue of trying to elicit the public permits is to help the people that are suffering financial damage. If I have a farm in the zone, but I'm not having damage, and I go to the public and state, hey, you can come here for $500 when the chances of seeing elk are slim and none. I'm just saying, are we really accomplishing what we're trying to do by allowing private land hunting?
I saw your recommendation as an opportunity to provide more hunting opportunities. And if a secondary result of that allows private land owners the ability to have someone on their property for a monetary return, then that would be another benefit. But I think that what we're really trying to do is provide some opportunity for the sportsman.
I'm not in argument with you. I'm just saying that I don't believe in depredation permits for elk, because shooting one elk is not going to accomplish anything for Ms. Griffin. But if we can coax somebody to hunt an area that's having damage and get some financial return for her, I think that's what, in my opinion, that's what I thought we were trying to accomplish.
I think we saw that different.
May I interject anything here? Am I allowed to do that?
Anything that hadn't been said, or we obviously have a long meeting, but I want you to get everything that you want to say out. But
Okay, in reference to what Commissioner McMillan just proposed, the way our property lies, for example, there is a field that joins our property that's a very open field right off of the county road. That property is owned by a man in Virginia. He does nothing to invest any money into that open field. That open field is right across the creek from our 320 acres. And so it's very likely, as Commissioner McMillan has suggested, that that individual could offer a tag or offer a hunting fee for $500. They could call the elk into his field and shoot it. He's put $500 in his pocket, and he had no expense involved whatsoever. There's no fencing there. There's no investment to that property. And that's just one landowner that joins our property. So, again, I still think that because there's not been, in my opinion, enough landowner input into how, I'm all for hunting on private land, but I think that it needs to be targeted to those areas who are incurring the most damage, because if you're trying to generate revenue to help the damage that's occurring on the farm, it's not going to take place like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the commission?
Yeah, I've got a comment. I appreciate you coming, because I love the elk, and I hate to hear that somebody's having the problems that you're having. But I think the hunts that we're talking about are not gonna, as Commissioner Teague said, are not gonna have any effect on the population. So the answer is that we need to provide habitat for the elk so they don't gravitate to the farms to eat. We need more money budgeted, and I think the director's probably looking for an elk coordinator now, and I think that more than likely I guess we're going to maybe try to move some of the elk, but if we don't provide them more habitat where they will stay where we put them, then they'll be back. So I'm hoping that, and I'm sure the agency will come up with a recommendation for us to do that, since you brought this to the meeting. But I suspect that you'll see some better results than you've seen in the past.
We are certainly open for trapping elk on our farm. We have a large area where that can occur. As I stated in my presentation, there were 2 elk that were removed from the farm on March the 17th. That was the first elk that's been taken off of our farm since the elk were introduced in 2000. So we're looking forward to the new elk biologist coming on board. We're certainly willing to work with him however we can to get the elk off of our farm. But I certainly agree with you that the elk are going to be back. I mean, we have had as many as 60 elk on our farm. And again, I have pictures to show you if you're interested in seeing them after the meeting. I'll be here after the meeting.
Chairman, I guess maybe this is the question that would be answered by the new elk biologist, but maybe our biologists can address it, guys and gals that we have on board right now. If we were to trap these elk and relocate them to the WMA, what would your opinion be about the chances of them coming back to this farm? And I don't know how close she is in proximity to the WMA. How far are you from the? Do we have a map?
We are
of
very
of the elk
close.
zone?
We're as a crow flies. We're not very far.
Okay.
We're very close to the Campbell County line. I'm not real computer savvy, and I brought some pictures today on a flash drive, and they weren't on there, so I'm sorry. But that's just my age and stage of life. We are close to Oneida, where our farm is located. We're close to Norma. And those of officers, John Mike said he was the wildlife officer in Scott County some time ago. So he actually is familiar with where the property is because he knows the property that lies up above us, so maybe you could better address that.
Yeah, her farm's very close. Part of the property that's close that we're doing some habitat work on right now is known as Mon Pettit, and that's some property that we have a MOU with, if I remember correctly, the name of the company, I think it's Empire. but don't hold me to that name of the company, but it's an oil gas company, and we have access to their property that we can manage, and we have it open to the public. We've done work there, and that's very, very close to the Allen Farm. What we're trying to do is the elk that we dart there and collar and relocate, we're taking them as far away as we can and still stay on TWRA property. And the elk that we took off out of Smith Creek, we took those to Tackett, which is that upper corner of Claiborne County. I don't have a pointer. Well, maybe is this.
How many land miles are we talking?
By road, you're probably talking about 80, 90 miles by road. By air, I never have really calculated it, but the Allen Farm is basically right in there.
So do you have any experience yet knowing whether they've migrated back?
Those two haven't come back. They were two young bulls. We took them to Tackett Creek in this area, close to there, and they're staying there pretty close.
But they were taken there March the
Excuse me.
17th.
Excuse me. Let me make a point of clarification of what's before us. What this commission is charged with is acting on the big game proclamation that's before us and the amendment that has been made by Commissioner McMillan. I've been involved in this pretty heavily for the past 3 weeks. And I do this publicly. I apologize. This has not been given attention as I did the other day in our office, but by the commission or by our agency. A lot of that was lack of knowledge. You have done a phenomenal job of bringing us up to speed. I'm sorry it's taken so long for that attention to be given. That being said, there's 2 paths of action, one of which this commission has charge over, and that is the proclamation itself. The second is what is given authority-wise to the region and what they can do. We will not solve this problem as a commission today, nor should we. Nor should we solve this by proclamation. The region has, I can assure you, this has been given the utmost attention by the region and the regional manager, and they are working towards a plan to address some of these matters. The comments made with respect to the extra tags and the potential financial help that tag might generate on private property is true, but that is not going to solve this problem. So I would respectfully ask that I concur with Vice Chair how you presented this. Thank you. The respect you've shown us, the patience you've shown with us, thank you. I do want to bring this back to the proclamation, the amendment to the proclamation itself, and to see if there are any other public comments that want to be made with respect to this. And then during the break, I think it would be good, Ms. Griffiths traveled a long way. It would be good if we could have John Gregory and any of the commissioners that want to talk with her and with John about what some of the thoughts are. Are there any other comments from the public related to the amendment that's on the table? Excuse me, Chairman Teague, I wanted to get us back to the proclamation itself. That's back to you, sir.
You're doing good, and you may have said what I was thinking, but I'll restate it. I don't want you to feel like that because we're adding hunting opportunity that concern elk that we think that's, a solution to your issues. That's just something that we have the ability to do, and we feel like it will be beneficial in numerous ways. But I think everybody's been really involved as a commission. We've talked about elk as much as I have in the last 5 years over the last month, and I think it's definitely a focus, and we understand that this is the issue that you're dealing with, and hopefully with the success of the elk, it's going to happen other places too. So we need to figure out the best way to deal with it, and also support and grow a really awesome resource.
Am I through?
If you're through, you tell me.
Joey?
Commissioner Teague,
We got to vote on it.
we gonna vote.
We have an amendment on the floor right now specific to this proclamation, I think requires action. And it has been seconded.
Sure. We have an amendment, proclamation 16-32. I'm gonna call for a vote of, Wildlife Management Committee. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Amendment passes.
Danette, as a matter of the record, I believe Commissioner McMillan made the motion and Commissioner Cox did second it.